Okay, we're back, and here is what I have so far. I'm going to do a little bit of measurement here. I have a flexible measuring tape. And it's actually a little more. It's somewhere close to 7 inches, which is fine. And so now what we're ready to do is to begin the process of finishing this piece up. And what I want you to do is leave your piece on your needle, and we're going to pull quite a bit of yarn here, and I'm going to cut it. We're going to also grab our tapestry needle. And we're going to then make sure, of course, this is not tangled. I just like to run it through my fingers this way just to ensure there are no knots or tangles. And add it to our tapestry needle. And you can use any needle if you're a sewer, but the great thing about tapestry needles is it's a really large eye opening so that you can fit the yarn through. And I usually try to fold it over with quite a bit of yarn so I don't have to worry about it slipping off. Now for this project, you can either bind it off, or we can just use the tapestry needle to finish off this project, since we want to gather the top in order to close the top of the hat. So we're going to use our tapestry needle, and you're just going to go through the stitch on the needle and pull it off. I'm going to push my stitches forward. You're going to pull it off, and you're going to just do this for all of these stitches. You can run it through all at one time if you're really good. I usually do a few and pull them off and start pulling on my yarn a bit, just so that it won't get tangled. And keep going. And you want to keep doing this until you no longer have any stitches on your needle. Now, I did say that it is an option. According to the pattern, you can bind off. You can look at the last demonstration for binding off in order to see the process of binding off this project. If you decide to bind it off, well, then you will just you would still thread your yarn on your tapestry needle, and you would just gather these top stitches. But I thought if we did it this way on the demonstration, it would give you another option. And it actually somewhat covers 2 steps at once. We are removing our stitches by taking them off of our needle, and we're also gathering them at the same time. And I'm nearing the end. The really great thing also about this pattern is you can do it in different colors. You can do different stitch combinations based on those that are provided. You can even alternate those stitch options. And we are nearing the end. And that is my last one. What I'm going to do is I'm not going to pull this tight just yet, but I am going to pull the yarn through all of the stitches without gathering it at this time. So I'm going to you'll see me pull in this. And then we will already have the yarn weaved through. And there, it's all the way through. As you see here, it's pulled all the way through. And we're going to leave it like this for just a moment. I am going to just remove my tapestry needle for a brief moment, and then we're going to seam of our sides to close off our hat. And I cut my tail, so I need to gather a little more yarn in order to do my seaming. If you kept your tail end long the way that we began, then you can just add your tapestry needle onto your tail, and you want that to be at least double the length of your project. And I'm adding it onto my needle again. And now what we're going to do is seam up our sides so that we can close off our cap. So we're going to fold it up. I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to bring in the ends together so that they will meet. And we're going to seam this up. I'm going to first, now if you do this with your tail, it'll be so much easier. I just cut it because it was in the way as I was working. But you could just begin on the ends and work your way all the way up on both sides. But we're going to just go. When you do the garter stitch, you have these little, you have the garter ridges, and one looks somewhat like a frown and one looks like a smile. On one side, you want to go underneath one of those for smiles. And so on this left-hand side, I'm going to go underneath that smile and pull it through. And on the other side, I'm going to go in that frown. And you really want to work in the same stitches on both sides so that you will have it be somewhat symmetrical if you can. Now, I must tell you that as you work, you will learn what type of seaming process you just work best with. And there are different types. If you are a sewer or you work with any other types of crafts like cross stitch or anything of that nature, it would be similar. You're just doing it with yarn. The other thing is this is your first hat. And so you want to be lenient on yourself and give yourself room to grow and learn. As you try the new stitches and the new colors, you can try different methods of seaming it so that you can determine which one you prefer. And if you see, I usually will work all the way through, and I see that this yarn is extremely long, and so I'm actually going to cut a little bit more just so that it won't get in the way of you seeing. But again, this is another one of those works in progress. I'm going to pull a tad bit more and cut it. It's just usually easier to have too much than too little. And I always find something to do with all my scraps. So I'm going to continue to seam up every stitch on every side. And I will see you at the end. I'm going to do a few more stitches here. Now you could gather 2 at a time, but I found that after doing all of that work to knit it up, it's just best to take your time. You don't want to rush it at the end and then compromise your finished product. And this makes for a really decent seam. It's almost as if you would have knitted it all together and not in a flat motion. So, here's what I have so far. And you already can see that it's almost hard to see. And I haven't tightened the stitches yet. I'll do that as we get to the top. And so what I'm going to do is continue along this process, and I will see you once we get towards the top. Okay, I'm nearing the end of doing the seam, and I want to come a little closer just in case it was a little more difficult to see here at the bottom. I'm going to thread my yarn again, and just because I wanted to show it again, And you just, some people it's easier to fold it over and insert it and then just pull it through. And you want to make sure you get the entire piece of yarn through. You don't want it to unravel like this or split. Smooth it out. And I fold it over, and I am just going underneath the stitches that are in this column and the stitches that are in this column. I'm going underneath this stitch. And then I go underneath this stitch. And I usually go one stitch in from that edge stitch, just so that your stitches won't be too tightly wounded together. And you're just zigzagging across. It's almost like whenever you see the back of a corset. And we're nearing the top, and here you want to be very careful that you don't get your yarn tangled with our yarn that's at the top of our cap, just because we still have it connected. And we just have a couple more stitches, and you just continue, and I'll pull back in just a few minutes. Now I'm going to stop one row shy of the top of our cap, just because I don't want to gather those stitches since the yarn is being carried throughout the top. Now, as you can see here, now that we've closed this up, and it is loose, we've closed it up, and you now have a tube. And what we want to do now is kind of give it a little tug. As you give it a tug, you'll see the seams being pulled together all the way down your piece. It's almost like magic. So, until you pull to the end. And then I'll give it I usually give it one additional tug, and then I will let the string go and I will start pulling on my piece. Now look at that. You can't even see the closing. I always think it's fascinating. Okay, so now I have to pull. Now that it's done all the way through the top, I'm going to take this string, and I'm not going to cut it yet. I'm going to take off the tapestry needle, and I'm going to just make sure I move all of this string and put it together, because I want to use it to connect this one last row after we gather the top of our hat. And this is going to be the inside of our hat. We will flip it and see the outside shortly. Now that we have that done, we can now begin to close off the top of our hat. Since we went around in a circle, through the top of our stitches, and then we folded it, and now it's a cylinder. Here was the end of our piece when we went back through the top, and now it's closed off. So what we're going to do is take the end and pull it tight, making sure that the fold here from the end is pulled into the hat. And I'm going to just get where I feel like I got a good grip on it. And now it's time to pull it close. Keep pulling. And sometimes I'll stick my hand inside just so that I can see where that closing is. Almost there. And you pull it as tight as you can. And what we're going to do is just put a couple of stitches in there just to make sure that we close it completely. I don't like to pull this top so that it closes it all the way, because the inside yarn usually is pulled so tight that we don't want it to break. And there are other ways to do a hat, but this is what happens when we do it in the flat. And I'm going to cut the yarn a little and remove the excess. I'm going to add my tapestry needle again. And then I'm going to just go through the top of the stitches just a little bit, just to tighten this. And you can go across and gather. And this is a little harder to see, but you just want to grab the tops of the stitches. I'm going to put my hand inside here and just grab them. You here across and pull them close and pull it close. You want to do that just across a few times until you feel like your hat is secure the way that you would like for it to be. And I usually go across, back and forth across the top. Can you believe it? You are almost done knitting your first hat. You're almost done. And if you have made it to this point, you've made it through all of the lessons, and you can officially call yourself a knitter. I'm almost done. Still gathering across, back and forth. The wonderful thing is that this is the inside of the hat, and so this part won't be seen. If you're doing this hat for a little one or someone actually, versus it just being a test hat, when you do this part, you want to make sure that you don't do it so tight and so hard that it causes your knit fabric to be hard, because then it will kind of rub against the baby's head, and you don't want that. But if you do it snug but gently, you should have no issues with it. And that's also a time when you pick a softer yarn to help you with that process as well. And I'm going to work my way back over, because I see I have a tiny, tiny opening over there. And I'm just going to work my way back across. This is the part where you just kind of have to work with what you got. Every project brings a new journey, even when you've done the pattern a million times. And we're almost there. Okay. And now I'm going to close up this final little hole here. And we will be ready to finish off the hat. What we're going to do is close this off and make sure you're still careful of that last little bit of yarn that we had left over from seaming up our side. And there we go. And I would say go through there, look and make sure you have no other openings, because you don't want the top of the head exposed. And now what you want to do is we're going to make a little knot using the string that we used to seam and the string that we used to close. And we're going to just cut those and do a square knot. Just a normal square knot, as if you were tying your shoe, not too tight. And I actually do this 2 or 3 times, usually 3. And on that last one, give it a real good pull. And once you do that, you're going to snip those ends as close as you can. And since it's the inside, it'll blend really well. And your hat is complete. All we have to do is sew in our ends. And so in the next video, I'm going to show you the final step of completing your hat, which is sewing in your tails, which are the ends from the yarn. And we will do that, and we will complete this hat. And we're going to add the tail, one of the tails, onto your tapestry needle. And this process, you want to just hide those ends in the body of your work. And so you can go under other stitches. You don't want to pull it too tight so that it's kind of masked in here. This is another one of those things that as you practice, and I'm just sewing it up and down through the back of the ridges. Once you do this for about an inch or so of that tail, I always give it a slight pull so that it gathers a bit. Then I cut the yarn at an angle. And it leaves a little bit of a tail there. And then I pull my piece to allow it to sort of embed itself throughout the project. And now you can't see it. So let's do the last one. Now you may only have one. I had two because I had to join a new piece of yarn. But I'm going to do this one last one. I'm going to sew the ends in. And all of this is being worked on the inside of your hat. Go here. We are nearing the end. I usually run it for just a little while. Now, I have found over the years of knitting, as well as crocheting, that different projects calls for either more or less seaming in. For a baby project, usually they're not as rough and tough as maybe a toddler or a child is on a blanket. And on those, I tend to be a little more, I run it for a lot further. But for this one, I think we have come to a good completion. And now I'm ready to give it a little pull. And now cut it at an angle. And pull. It causes it to embed. If you see, you'll have another little piece. I'll just snip it. And now it's time to flip the hat right side out. And the wonderful thing about garter is that there's no difference between the right and the wrong side. There you have it. And my hat, I want it to have a slight cuff just by folding it up. And there you have it. Your very first knit hat.